Well, good morning, church. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are doing good. And I want to say hello to everybody that's joining us online. Good to have you. Fear can stop us from doing the things that we need to do or making the change that we need to make. When I was first married, Logan and I were living in California in a little duplex there, and we were just trying to make things happen, make things work in our young lives. And so we were there, and we were in bed and trying to fall asleep one night, and then all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like two voices talking in the living room. And I hear that, and I'm trying to make sense of it, and Logan, she kind of whispers over, she says, "Hey, do you hear that?" And I'm kind of getting nervous, and I heard it, but I said, what are you talking about? And I wish I could just tell you that the reason I said that was just to kind of calm her fears a little bit of what was happening, but the rest of the story betrays me. And so she said, there's people in our house. And the thing that I said next just totally ruins any kind of title that I thought I had of protector or good husband or anything like that. And I said, well, why don't you go out there and see what's going on. The look I got was a mixture of what kind of a man did I marry and get your butt out there. And so I got up, I read the situation, and I got up, and I put something in my hands. I don't know what it was, but I went out there, and I peeked around the corner, and I walked out into the living room. And that night, I had to defend myself and my brand new wife. I had to forcefully turn off the TV. This TV, it had this weird habit of just turning on all of a sudden, I guess. And man, I tell you what. We're in the middle of a series right now called Even If, and it's a series about change in our lives. And one of the things that we often experience whenever it comes to change is fear. And fear can prevent us from doing what we need to do, or it can even just stop us from making the change that we need to make in our lives. I mean, all kinds of fear. We think of the fear of failure, right? The fear of failure is enough to shut us down. It can keep us from even trying to do what we want to do. I mean, I wonder how many books have not been written because somebody was afraid to type out the first chapter. Or I think of how many songs have not been written because somebody was afraid that it wasn't going to be good enough. How many businesses that could have changed lives did not get started because somebody was afraid of failure. How many relationships never began because somebody was afraid to say hello. Or how many callings have not been fulfilled because somebody was afraid to take that first step of faith. We want to know the outcome. We can be afraid of the unknown. If somehow we knew that we would be successful before we even started it, then it would be, a piece of cake. But we don't know. We don't know the after. After we take that step of faith, we are not sure what's going to happen. And so there's a fear of the unknown. Or there can even be a fear of judgment. Because we don't want to be rejected by people, and so many times we don't tell people what we're doing. Many times people are trying to lose weight or make a positive change in their life. They don't want to tell a lot of people because if they fail at doing that, it's one thing if I know about it myself, but it's a whole different thing if I told people and now they see that I failed in that. And so we have a fear of judgment. But my question is, what if fear didn't have to shape us? What if it didn't have to hold us back from the positive changes that God wants in our lives? In the Old Testament, there was God's people called the Hebrews. And they were enslaved in Egypt. And so they cried out to God and to save them. And God did. He sent a guy named Moses, and he went in there and he rescued the people out of slavery. And he brought them to an incredible land of their own called the Promised Land. It was a wild story, but the people of Egypt were there, and their first problem was, how do we get out of here? And Moses shows up and does an incredible thing. He rescues them, and he brings them all the way out to the outskirts of the promised land. He defeats the Egyptians, and he brings them all the way to the promised land. And whenever they get there, to the very edge of it, he sends 12 spies into the land. And they go all throughout the land, all the way to the north, the east, the west, the south. They go throughout all of it. And they go and inspect it. And here was their report in Numbers chapter 13. If you got your Bibles, turn to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13, verse 27, and they start to give a report of what they see in that promised land. And it goes like this. They said, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. The land was beautiful, and the land had everything that they needed. And they even said it flows with milk and honey. You know, and then you always wonder, like, why do they always say milk and honey? You know, what was the deal there? Did they just really love milk and honey in their cereal every morning? What was going on there? Well, no. Milk and honey was a symbolic gesture to say that the land was flowing with milk. In other words, it could sustain large livestock, such as cows and goats. The land was there. It was full of green pastures already. And then honey, it could be wild honey that they're talking about there, but the Hebrew word there, it makes you think that it's actually the sweet nectar of date palms that grew from trees. The land had trees. The land it could sustain livestock and trees. In fact, it was a land that didn't require hard labor. Now, this is a big deal to them because they were just slaves in Egypt, and all that they knew was scarcity. All they knew was hard work. And now here they are in the promised land, at the very edge of the promised land. And it's a great land. It's got everything they want and need. But look what happens in the very next verse. Look in verse 28. They say this, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. It was all good until they saw the people and the fortifications there. I like how the King James says it down in verse 33, and they continue this, and they say, we saw giants. There were giants in the land. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight as well. There were giants there. The land is good. The land is great. But it's got giants in it. 10 of the 12 spies that went in there, they tried to discourage and dissuade the whole nation not to go in. These giants are too big. But here's the deal. The Israelites already had everything that they needed to go into that land. First of all, giants to God, giants in the land of God are nothing, right? Like, it doesn't matter how tall they are to God. Like, if I'm racing babies, it doesn't matter like how long they measure. You know, I'm going to win that race every time. It's not a problem. So giants to God it's a non-factor. But just think about this. In and of themselves, take even God out of the picture, in and of themselves, they were built different. They were the nation that was built different. They were hardened people that knew what it was to be in pain and to work hard. They were a nation of grit. Unlike the comfortable Canaanites who lived in the land. They shouldn't have been afraid to enter a posh land and confront a long-settled group like that. But here's the deal. They measured the wrong thing. They measured their giants instead of their God. And when you get caught measuring the wrong thing, it makes cowards of us all. Their hearts melted in fear because they focused on the bad that might happen instead of the good that would happen. They measured the wrong thing. And when you and I decide to make a positive, a godly change in our lives, there's going to be giants. I promise you, there's going to be a giant that follows that change. There's no great thing that doesn't have a challenge attached to it. That's how it goes. Someone once said, whenever you give a vision in your heart, you get a target on your back. If the greatest things were easy, they wouldn't be so great, would they? By definition, when we see those challenges, it creates fear in us. We get nervous. The fear of failure or judgment or the fear of the unknown. Those are all kinds of giants. But here's the thing. The fear isn't wrong. Being nervous isn't wrong. Fear can actually be a good thing in our lives, right? You guys all know that idiot that should have been afraid of something, but he wasn't. You know, we all know that guy, right? But to allow the fear to stop you from doing the thing that God has called you to do, that is equally as wrong. It's not easy to make a change, to get out of a toxic relationship, or to confront an addiction, or to change a bad habit in your life, or even to make a positive move that we know we should. Those things are not easy, but they are necessary. Often we respond like the spies did, and we say, in the shadow of the giants, we say, I can't do that. That's too difficult, it's too scary, and the giant of fear is too big. And the worst possible thing can happen. Even if we genuinely want what's on the other side of that change, the fear overcomes us and we stay put. And we even turn back. We don't move forward. We have no idea what we're missing out on if we allow our fears to kill our courage. When fear controls us, we miss the great things in life. I mean, the promised land to them was right there. And God was going to make it possible for them. But their fear was bigger than their faith. This is perhaps, I think, one of the saddest stories in all the Bible. I mean, you got a group, a nation of Israelites that were enslaved in Egypt. They had a terrible life. And now, here they are standing at the very edge of a promised land, a paradise of a life. God had already proven his capabilities to them already. He had defeated Egypt, the world's superpower, already. He toyed with them by sending 10 plagues. Each plague was making fun of one of their gods. He totally smashed their armies in the Red Sea. God had showed up already. And now, just a year or two later, it's estimated, there they are standing at the very edge of the promised land. But in the shadow of the giants, they lose their faith in God's ability. They walk away. Now, not all the spies reported negative. There was 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua. They were different. And here's what they said in Numbers, chapter 14 and verse 7. Flip the page and go over there. They said this in chapter 14, verse 7. They said to the Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Why was their response so much different than the other 10? Where were they coming from that the other people couldn't see? Well, they had seen God's power in the past. In Exodus chapter 6, verse 6, God had said something. He said this, therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. He told them that. And then what happened? Exactly that. God said it would happen, and then it happened. They had seen God's power before. And so because they had seen God's power before, they were able to trust his word that he would do it again. And so then, in verse 8, he says this, and I will bring you to the land that I swore with an uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. Now listen, if God stands there and swears with an upraised hand, something to be, you can trust that it's going to happen. Now it matters who says something, doesn't it? He says, I am the Lord. He said, I'm not just some guy, okay? I'm the Lord, and I'm swearing it to you, right? Now it matters who says something. Now you guys have heard the stories. If I tell you to trust me and get in the raft with me and go on a little water float trip down the river, you might hesitate, those of you guys who remember that story. If I tell you to, trust me, get in the passenger side seat of my semi-truck as I go down the road here, some of you guys know, you might hesitate a little bit. But if you've got a professional water guide there and he says it's safe, you might trust him. Or if you got a professional truck driver, you might trust them. Why? Because they've done it and they have a history. They have a track record. God said it. And he had done it. So you could trust it again. And because of that, that allowed them to focus on God's power, not their own. The other 10 spies, they focused on their own limitation, their own power. And they even said, but there's giants in the land. And we look like grasshoppers to them and to us. But to Joshua and Caleb, their power, their own power was irrelevant. It didn't matter what they could do. Because God wasn't going to need their power. All he wanted was their faith. That's why Joshua and Caleb said to everybody in Numbers, back in Numbers, in verse 14, or in chapter 14, verse 9, they said, only do not rebel. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land. Because we will devour them. Their protection is God, but the Lord is with us. They were able to recognize that it wasn't a matter of whether they were strong enough. It was a matter of obedience. All they needed to do was to show God that they trusted him and that he would do it for them. When my kids were little, they would stand up on the countertop in our kitchen, and they would face away from me, and then they would fall back, right? And then I would catch them, right? Now, let me ask you a question. Were they scared? Absolutely. What was the chances that I was going to drop them or wouldn't catch them? Now, some of you might say, oh, man, you shouldn't be doing that. Something could happen. You never know. No. All the fathers in the room, what are the chances that somebody's going to drop their child? Zero. It's absolutely zero. We're not going to drop them. Absolutely zero. But were they nervous? Absolutely. But they could trust that the Father was going to catch them. So that's where obedience comes in. Being nervous wasn't the problem. But what God wanted from them was, despite their fear, could they still trust him? You can still have courage. You can have courage even if you're afraid. Now, here's the crazy part. Now, I want to show you something in the text that's really interesting to me. It turns out that those two spies were right all along. And I know you say, yeah, of course, we know that later on in the story. Listen to this. The Hebrews were scared of the giants in the land. But it turns out the opposite was true too. Now, they wouldn't find this out for 40 years because God had punished them. You don't have faith in me? So then he turned them back to the desert. And for 40 years, they wandered the desert. But when they came back, they sent 2 spies into Jericho to go check it out. And whenever they got in there, the woman that they were with, she said this in Joshua chapter 2, verse 9. She said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord has dried up the water in the Red Sea for you when he came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord, your God, is God in heaven above and on earth below. It turned out that these giants that they were fearing weren't giants after all, that they were melting in fear themselves. They were right there, if only that they would have trusted him and moved forward. But they missed out on God's blessing because they allowed their fear to overcome their faith. Thomas Edison said, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. You and I have the same choice when it comes to making changes. You can have courage even when you're afraid. You can have courage to walk into Egypt against a mighty king. You can have courage to pick up a rock and face Goliath. You can have courage to be put in a lion's den. You can have courage to be put in the fire. You can have courage to walk into the promised land and fight giants. So here's how we put this into our lives. Number one, identify the change. Identify the change. Now, I know you might start to think about, what changes do I want to put in my life? Do I want to, eat better or exercise more? And those are great. Those are great. But I want you to think deeper. I want you to think about what your next step with God is. Believe, belong, become. Is it time for someone in here to start believing that Jesus is who He said He is, that He died, and that 3 days later He actually did rise from the dead? Is it time for you to call on the name of the Lord and to submit to Him because you know He's there and you feel Him calling? He wants your heart. Is it time to believe? For some, it might be to belong. That you believe, but now you need to move from just attending to belonging, to be part of something, to be part of kingdom work that we're trying to do here, to move from believing into belonging. And then for some of us, we need to take that third step of becoming like Jesus. Have the courage to ask God, what step do you want me to take? Now, that's an important question. And it's a question that only a disciple can ask. Because only disciples know that question comes with hard work. It comes with a cost. It comes with sacrifice. But in the end, it's worth it. Maybe for you, it's something more like, is there a relationship that's not good for you, that you need to step away from for a while? Is there a relationship that needs to be improved? Is there a habit in your life that needs to be replaced with something healthier? Or is there an attitude that needs to be changed? Whatever the change is, if it is of God, and if God wants this change in your life, then have the courage to move forward. So identify the change. But secondly, identify the fear. This is the thing that makes you want to pause and think, I don't know if I can do that. Maybe it's fear of judgment or failure, or maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Maybe it's the fear of actually changing. Maybe it's the fear of the work that it's going to take to make that change. Whatever it is, that is your giant. Pay attention to the giant, and then lastly, invite God in. There were so many people that stand at the edge of the promised land, but have a failure to launch. Do you remember that kid on the diving board at the pool? That he would get up there and he would stand at the edge of the diving board, and he wanted to jump in, and he knew it would be fun, but that water looked like 100 miles away, right? And he's standing up there, and everybody starts cheering for him. You can do it. Come on, let's go. And everybody's kind of like, I wish he'd just hurry up, right? But everybody's cheering for him. You can do it. Let's go. And eventually everybody starts counting down. 5, 4, 3. And he looks like he's going to get in, and he's preparing himself. And will he take the jump? 3, 2, 1. And every once in a while, there will be a kid that makes the jump. But many times, that kid, he doesn't. And he has to turn around, and in shame, he walks back up the diving board and down the ladder. If this change is from God in your life, and you're scared, then it means that it could be something powerful in your life. What if you are at the edge of your promised land? If you only have the courage to take that step, you'll step into the life that God has for you. I remember whenever I was being called into lead ministry, I had been a youth pastor for a long time. I knew how to do it, and I'd been pretty good at it. But I always knew that God was calling me into something deeper, something more. It was a little bit scary. I didn't know how that would go. I didn't know how it would end up. And one summer, I was splitting wood. I remember this pretty vividly, and I had a question that popped into my mind, and it was this. What story do you want your kids to tell of you? Man, that hit me hard. Because I didn't want my kids to say, well, he played it safe. He did what was easy. No. I want to take risks for the kingdom of God. When I was studying this passage, there was a verse that just slammed me in the face. And it was Numbers chapter 14, verse 24. And it says this, but because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land that he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Isn't that interesting? Caleb had a different spirit. He was able to stand in the shadow of the giants and choose to believe. He was able to choose courage. Don't you want to be like that guy? Don't you want to be like Caleb, who has a different spirit? That you'll step into whatever God is asking of you, whatever He is calling you, whatever He's inviting you to. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, there's giants in the land. But that you will have a different spirit, that you can see God and you can see a giant and you know which one to measure. That's the story that we tell of Caleb. What's your story going to be? You can have courage, even if. Let me pray.